Hello, and welcome to Norfolk Historical Society's podcast, bringing local history to life. I am Michelle Grant, President, and I know that you will enjoy listening to our members and guests talk about their favorite Norfolk County history moments. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook, or contact us at info@norfolkhistoricalsociety.ca. Donations are welcome to help us to continue with our preservation of Norfolk County history. Enjoy.
I'm here with Andy Blackwood, a member of the Norfolk Historical Society and my former high school history teacher, who's here to share another history lesson with us, the history of Norfolk's history, the Norfolk Historical Society. Thank you for participating in this. So how did the Norfolk Historical Society get started?
Well, I've never been one to teach dates, but I'm going to give you a date anyway. On February 9th, 1900, a group of prominent Norfolk citizens, led by the editor of the Simcoe Reformer, Hal Donnelly, got together and decided that it would be in the best interests of the people of this county to preserve and promote the history of the county and its citizens for future generations. Many of the people who formed the NHS were descended from Norfolk's first families, many of whom personal histories went back over 100 years. Now, most of their activities in the early times were the presentation of historical papers and talks on significant aspects of Norfolk history, and the putting up of cairns and plaques, which were a really accessible and visible reminder to people of their past. It has to be said that it didn't start well. The NHS had a rocky start to its existence. In the first year, it appealed to local town council for financial support since it had only $1 in its treasury. The town gave it $25, which is about $700 now. In the minutes in the 1908 annual meeting, which was reported in the Simcoe Reformer, it was recorded that the NHS in 1907 had held 3 meetings and had 54 members, and that, quote, 2 members had been removed by death, end quote, which I find very interesting to include in the minutes of the society. And it was hard in the early years, to be honest, to get the public interested. For a lot of people, the history of the county was not necessarily a priority, and there were some years that the society never met at all. They might meet once a year or twice a year or every second year. During World War I think they held 1 meeting in 4 years because, of course, there were more important things to worry about. But most of their activities during that time, as I mentioned, were putting up plaques and cairns. Some of the most important ones, there were lots of them, but there was certainly the founding of Simcoe and Linwood Park, which you can see if you walk through Linwood Park, the cairn and plaque to the wintering place of Dolier and Galinée in Port Dover, and the recognition of Abigail Becker, who, of course, as most people know, is the heroine of Long Point, who was also a member in 1900. And this helped raise the interest in the society and helped to make people aware of their history, more than they had before.
We do tend to take our history for granted, and it's interesting to see which details of history are preserved versus what gets left behind. A great initiative that preserves the personal details and faces of our history is the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum and Archives. Now, much of what the Norfolk Historical Society has done throughout the years is associated with the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum and Archives. How did this come about?
The idea for a museum began around 1927. The Simcoe Reformer was a big supporter of this, as was Edgar Cantillon, who most people, I hope most people know, was a very, very prominent artist in Norfolk, and was in fact the curator of the collection, which was eventually established from the late 1920s until the early 1940s. He's a really important part of this because his paintings of which Eva Brooke Donnelly, the archives, have over 300, showed all kinds of architectural and other sites which no longer exist. And so they are the only record of a lot of sites in Norfolk, and thus very, very important. He was a big mover on this. And so what happened was all the things that people thought, well, I'd like to preserve this, I'd like to keep it, but don't know what to do with it. A lot of them were donated. And the artifacts, photographs, documents that had been collected and donated to the NHS were secured in the basement of the Simcoe Library, which these days is the present Cobb & Jones Law on Argyle Street in Simcoe. The Norfolk Museum of Art and Antique opened in 1934 in the basement of the library, and the donation of artifacts speeded up quite significantly because now people knew there was a place that they could give them over to, and they would be protected and secure. 1929, which was, as I said, 2 years after the museum started, the NHS incorporated so that it could hold property. And it had about 100 members at the time. The real impetus for the museum, which would, as you said, eventually become the center of the Historical Society's activities, came about because of Eva Brooke Donnelly, who was a very well-known Simcoe-born artist and a member of the Brooks family, one of the fine families of Simcoe. She bequeathed her home in her will. Her husband had died. They had no children. She left it to the town of Simcoe as a place to establish a museum. She also left an endowment of $10,000. This all sort of works together well because her husband, who was the brother of Hal Donnelly, his name was Augustine, had married Emma, who was Eva's sister. So the Brooks and the Donnellys, two of the most influential families in Simcoe, got together in a number of ways, all tied up around art and culture and heritage. And obviously, they believed in the preservation of Norfolk heritage and did great things towards that.
It's amazing the legacy that they've left from like-minded individuals who cared about something. How did the Norfolk Historical Society help establish a museum?
The society was invited to create the museum in Eva Brooke Donnelly's home and take all the artifacts, the paintings, the documents that had been in the library and the registry office. It was officially opened in 1942. It had a board of control that had NHS members and members of council and other people. It was the first museum in Norfolk County, and over the years, its collection would help to create the other museums in the area. It had a vast collection of artifacts, and as I mentioned later on, over 300 paintings of Edgar Candlon, which are still there. In 1950, 8 years later, the museum was open 2 afternoons a week, Wednesday and Saturday.
Now, fast forwarding to 2021, what's available at the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum and Archives thanks to the Norfolk Historical Society?
If you go there, it has over 20,000 Norfolk County artifacts, some of national importance. Personal papers, 10,000 photographs of early Norfolk County. If you want to know what this county looked like at any stage over the past 150 years, you can go there. It was for the longest time supported by American Can and Stelco. And the NHS had hundreds of members and great support, and people donated when they had something they thought was important, couldn't keep it anymore. The donation sheets at the museum are incredible. People would donate all kinds of things, furniture, signs, documents, pictures, personal reminiscences. It's quite remarkable what's down there. You know, as I mentioned to someone once, it's a treasure trove. Along with the artifacts at the other museums in the county, there's almost nothing you can't find out about our past there.
So the museum was the main activity of the Norfolk Historical Society, but not the only one, right?
Oh, right, yeah. One of the most significant parts of the activities was the establishment of the archives. Since 1967, when the centennial wing of the museum was built and the Norfolk Gallery had been in place, that was the gallery on the first floor that traced the history of Norfolk County. Hundreds of volunteers and thousands of hours were put into organizing and preserving thousands of documents and genealogical information, which frankly has attracted the attention of people all over Canada and the United States and the world. We used to get emails from all over North America, and I remember one from Germany, who said, I'm looking to trace my ancestors. I know they came from your area. Can you send us information? And 99 times out of 100, we were able to do that. Most of this work that was done for the archives was done under the direction of curator at the time, William Yeager, who was the curator from the 1970s right up until 2008. And you could do a whole show on his work on behalf of the history of this county. And in fact, the archives are dedicated to him in honor of all the work that he put in towards this.
While we appreciate his efforts, there's more to our history than what you can fit into one building. Sometimes it's the buildings themselves.
Well, that's true. The Historical Society, along with other heritage groups, and we're not the only group in Norfolk. There are a number of them, but the NHS has always been concerned about the preservation of unique and important architectural sites as well. In 1974, it spearheaded the fight to save our courthouse, which had been erected in 1864. City Council had decided to demolish it since a new courthouse was being built on the Queensway. But through the efforts of the NHS and a number of highly motivated citizen groups and high school students, the building was saved, and it now houses the county council chambers. And if you come on one of our walking tours, you'll find out more about that.
Wow. Now, what other buildings and historical sites in the community have been preserved by the Norfolk Historical Society?
Well, and I want to just say they haven't been preserved by them so much, rather than the impetus to preserve them came from the NHS. Another one is very close to the courthouse. It's the Market Building and the Fireman's Hall, which now houses Valley Engineering, which was saved through the efforts of the NHS, as was the Alligator Tug, which was, if people don't know, it's a very unique invention, an amphibious tug used to transport log booms through northern Ontario, built in here in Simcoe by Weston Peachy, just across from Linwood Park, next to where the post office is. In 1991, an alligator hunt was started by the NHS, trying to find an alligator tug, which they did find. And over the next 5 years, along with private donation and great service club support, the NHS led the way to restoring and refloating the W.D. Stocker Alligator Tug, which was launched in 1997. If you walk the Lynn Valley Trail today between Simcoe and Port Dover, you'll see lovely storyboards describing the history of the railroads and the industries which used to run along and were adjacent to that trail. The research was provided by the curator of the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum on behalf of the NHS. The NHS helped the county document through photographs every gravestone in Oakwood Cemetery. And for over 40 years, the NHS held gallery talks on significant Norfolk events and personalities. It organized school programs, museum visits. It handled hundreds of inquiries every year to the archives about family history. It held Norfolk Lore every September for over 40 years, and Norfolk Lore was one of the longest-running genealogical fairs in Ontario. It still does historical walking tours, which we're hoping to get online, and once COVID allows it again, it has an annual history trivia competition.
Now, in 2018, the operation of the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum and the vast collection it housed was turned over to Norfolk County. Why was that?
Well, at amalgamation in 2002, the Historical Society decided to maintain Eva Brooke Donnelly independently rather than come under the umbrella of county. And it did so for 15 years, very effectively. But even though we had a lot of success with, our mandate with the community, it struggled, as many charities often do, with generating sufficient revenue through memberships and fundraising and grants to cover operating costs. And a lot of our membership was getting older. They were putting their money to other causes, which is understandable. To put a long story short, after a long process of negotiation and some nail-biting council meetings, the county agreed to take over the operation of the museum and the archives and accept this treasure trove, which the NHS had collected and preserved for nearly 120 years.
Wow. Now, how does that work in terms of making sure that all the artifacts and records are preserved properly? Do they have assistance or consultation, or do they just look for someone who has experience with that to kind of handle that file?
When it was first turned over, it was agreed to hire a full-time archivist. And the plan was to use the building as the Norfolk County Archives, which is what it is now. And council has decided that it will be the repository of all old governmental records and will be the archive which will hold all of the important documents which have been generated by the government of Norfolk over the last how many years. And so an archivist was essential. They also hired a part-time curator to handle the extensive collection which was there. Unfortunately, last year, with the consideration of council to look at a new way to organize the museums, the part-time curator was let go. The archivist is still there. One of the things that's important for people to know is that in the transfer agreement, it was agreed that Norfolk County would be responsible for and maintain the collection that was handed to them, and that it would be cared for and would be accessible to the public. And it will be. You can't just get rid of a collection. There are rules. So the collection is not going anywhere. It may be put out to other museums. In fact, a number of our really important artifacts have been lent to other Norfolk museums. And so the county is making sure that people can still see them, just maybe not in the place that it was originally intended. So they are being cared for, and hopefully with the new consultation that they're going to do on museums and archives, they will come up with a plan that will allow for future generations to appreciate them as we have up to this point.
So it's 2021. Is there still a place for the Norfolk Historical Society? And if so, what does your future look like?
Is there a place? Absolutely, there's a place. It's almost as if I asked you to ask that question. We're still in business. We're just in a different form. For a long time, the NHS was perceived, rightly or wrongly, as the Simcoe Historical Society. There are those who sort of thought we concentrated on Simcoe, and really, in a way, we sort of did, because we were so centered in Eva Brooke that we depended on other people to concern themselves with other regions of the county. But we're determined to go back to the original premise of this that Hal Donnelly had, which was to promote and protect the history of all of Norfolk's communities. We want to be a truly Norfolk Historical Society. Now, we are virtual at the moment. Now, that's partly to do with the fact that we don't have offices. If anybody has a room somewhere that we could use to put a filing cabinet and a few records, we'd appreciate that. But we have a website where you can become a member, you can donate, or you can simply get on our mailing list. We have a Facebook page, and please follow us if you're Facebookers. We're on Instagram. We are developing online content, videos, more podcasts. We will continue to be, as we've always been, a very active and vocal advocate for the unique history of this county. And we want to work with other community and heritage groups and historical societies to fund initiatives which help preserve our past. And we'd like to get more historical plaques up, just like they did 100 years ago. They're the easiest and most accessible way to tell people about their history. And they do a very good job of that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. We're always looking for ideas for projects to work on. So if anybody has ideas, has projects, if anybody is interested in volunteering for us, being on the board of directors, we'd love to have some younger people on the board of directors. And I know absolutely every big organization says that. But I think it's really important to get a younger voice in something like this, as just for a better understanding of how to approach younger people and younger families.
For those interested in volunteering or perhaps joining the board of directors, what would you be looking for?
Forward-looking, enthusiastic people who like history and have a unique perspective on how to present it to people. It is a different world. Online, let's face it, aside from COVID, online is the way that people get their information. That's something that we have to consider. And I think someone who is interested in doing this and has an understanding of how to reach people in a different way and who has an enthusiasm for history and for heritage, that's what we're looking for. We'd love to get back into the schools and reach out to younger people and make them aware of their heritage. I have to, on a personal note, when I first started teaching in 1983, I was extremely fortunate to be at Waterford District High School under the tutelage, I'll call it, of Bob Stevenson and Sandra Smith. And at the beginning of every grade 10 mandatory history course, we spent 2 weeks on local history and genealogy. We used to walk them up and down the streets, pointing out the architecture, pointing out the history. And then we would take them back in and make them aware of their own personal history, because the idea was if you don't know about your own personal history, if you don't know about the history of what's around you, what's down your block, what's in your county, you can't possibly understand the history of your country or the world. So it's something that I think we have an ability to do, to get back into schools and get students when they're young to appreciate where they came from. And we're looking forward to doing that if this nasty COVID thing ever goes away. The most important thing, I think, is to remind people, particularly those in government, that preserving your heritage and promoting your history are not fringe activities. They're essential to the character of your community and the things which help tie people together. It attracts people to your community. It attracts investment to your community. And it gives you a sense of place. And if you allow it to be dismantled and forgotten, you can never get it back again. We're looking forward to the future by working to preserve our past.
Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. We hope that this will encourage a new generation of people to step up and carry on that legacy.